So just to welcome you as you start to, I can see the numbers joining us, ticking up. So welcome. We'll just wait a minute or two to get going until you've all got on. In the meantime, if you want to introduce yourself in the chat function, it's always good to know who's there. You could, well, okay, you can give us a bit of a local weather report. It's interesting to see who we've got. We could have a little bit of a competition about who's furthest away, but maybe it doesn't matter much in these days. I think generally had a few people from Australia who tend to win that. I feel East Stafford's not quite as far as Australia. Or you could post your odds on whether how long we've got a government for, perhaps. Take bets on that, or maybe just keep us up to date in the chat with the latest ministerial resignations. That'd be helpful. Yeah, lots of some good people, good geographic selection here. I'm just a bit closer. From Wales to Somerset, up to Derbyshire, Leeds, Preston. Good representation from the north. Okay, how are we doing? Still people joining thick and fast, so let's just give people one more minute. Lots of local authority representatives, they're great. Good to see you there, Ben from Pump Federation. Okay, housing minister's just gone. If anyone hasn't got that, updates enabled on their smart devices. It's good to see you there, Russell from Parity. Yeah, great. Okay. But we're still having a few people, well, lots of people ticking in, but I think we'll make a start, and just so we can try and keep to time. So, welcome everyone. This is always a really enjoyable and positive day for Regen when we get to launch one of the reports, one of the things we've been working on. So this is the launch of Regen's latest paper, which is on kind of local leadership, the role of local leadership, the role of local in decarbonising heat. Hopefully we can offer you some a bit of distraction from the political psychodramas that might be playing out. But we did, in terms of being topical, we did actually, very cunningly, with a great deal of foresight, pick the day in which the Energy Security Bill is released. Perhaps might not quite get the coverage today it should do, but so yeah, an important day for energy in the round, and including in that bill some stuff that we'll get into today around, for example, heat network zoning, which is great to see included. So I'm Mo Hunt, I'm the Chief Executive of Regen. I'll be kind of facilitating, chairing today. So welcome everyone. Most of you, I think, know who Regen is. Emma, if you might just click on to that slide, just for those of you that don't. There you go. There's a nice snappy strapline, independent centre of net zero energy expertise and strategy, focused on analysing and addressing the systemic challenges of the energy transition. So that's us, and you can find out more in the usual ways. You can also join Regen if you haven't done so yet on our website. We want to be kind of part of that and get our information and mailings and be part of the sort of transformation Regen's we're trying to work towards. Okay, so let's get into the meat of today then. So Emma's kindly put up the agenda, so that I guess a little bit of background. One of I think fair to say Regen's, I don't know what we call it, kind of foundational beliefs, if you like, our kind of tenets, is that transformation of the scale of net zero, and particularly in today's context, heat, how we heat our buildings, how we keep warm in our homes. Is that can't just be a top-down technocratic shift, however brilliant David is, as we're going to hear from central government. This is a whole societal transformation. We're going to need to involve our great cities, our great regions, with local leaders, communities, all of us, really. And in fact, government's net zero strategy makes a similar point. The Committee on Climate Change makes a similar point, because it's obviously true, I guess. And in fact, when we talk to local authorities, we work with local authorities a lot, talk to them a lot. Big part of our work. Lots of great examples, great people, inspiring people, great projects going on in this space: decarbonising heat, following people's climate change emergency declarations, etc. But also, a lot of people feeling like the framework for national and local roles in this, and the partnership working, and the funding and the powers just isn't really very clear. And in the case of money, as we'll probably come back to, is short term, people running around spend money, just doesn't feel like the kind of clear framework we need. So that's the kind of underpinning of this project. We set out to look at a better framework between national and local government on decarbonisation. And you'll see our second item today is going to talk a little bit more about the report we've written and our conclusions. But first, for that, we're going to hear from David Cappo, who's Director of Clean Heat at BEIS, probably a relieved man today, having got out there, got lots of his stuff in the energy security bill, as I put it, on a bit more of a context, if you like. We all remember the heat and building strategy. Where are we? 9 months on. What sort of progress we're making, and to what, get a little bit of that context of what is the heat and building strategy progression. After David and Poppy, we then have a panel discussion with, we're going to bring in Alistair, Amy and Thomas, and trying to unpick some of the issues a bit more. So we do want you guys to all be involved. So thank you for introducing yourselves on the chat. That's great to see. Pleased to see we've got over 200 people on the call, so fantastic. So you can use the chat function to comments, suggest things, links to useful reports, sell your wares, whatever. Great to see in a way that online stuff does enable that kind of rich discussion between the participants using that function. So that's great. And then if you have specific questions, there's the Q&A function now. And I can be pleased to see that Cara is first off the bat with a question, pointing out some increasing temperatures, which I'll probably quite topical in the next few days. And so in the panel, with 200 people, we won't be able to take every question, but I'll keep an eye on those, and we'll try, and the panelists will keep an eye on those, and we'll try and sort of bring in as much as we can responses as we go along. Great. So that's the running order. So I think at that point, let's hand the floor over to David to give us a bit of an update on the heat and building strategy and progress. David, floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Merlin, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see the report that's come out today, Merlin. Regen is, as you know, I think an excellent organisation, and you always offer fantastic insight and put forward really interesting ideas about how we can take forward the economy-wide transformation that is needed if we are to decarbonise our buildings. And so I'm looking forward very much to hearing Poppy talk to the report a bit later on in the session. As you set out in your intro, I'm going to give a bit of a kind of intro and context setting of where we've got to from a kind of national perspective, getting on for now 9 months post the publication of the heat and building strategy, against the backdrop where quite a lot has been going on in the political space, but also in the energy space with very large increases people are seeing in their bills and concerns about energy security as a consequence of the situation in Ukraine. Let me give a little bit of an update, and it's really good. I don't know how you timed it to do this on the day that the Energy Security Bill is published, and clearly there are a number of heat measures in there which I'll touch on during the presentation. So let's just run through to the next slide. Thank you very much. So this familiar to everyone. Buildings a huge challenge when it comes to decarbonisation. 30% of emissions, 23% of that from heat. I always say agriculture and land use have it worse in terms of the scale and difficulty of the challenge, but decarbonising buildings probably perhaps next on the list in terms of difficulty. Let's click forward to the next slide. Things that we set out in the heat and building strategy as a quick recap. So clearly improving the energy performance, so energy efficiency of buildings, getting as many properties as possible to EPC band C by 2035, and a collection of programs to help deliver that. So things like the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, the Home Upgrade Grant, local authority delivery, and so on. You will have heard my Secretary of State tell Parliament that we're also working on a new scheme, a kind of new consumer offer, which, as many people have pointed out, including many on this call, is a gap in the energy efficiency space in relation to the heat and building strategy. The second point, a really big part of the heat and building strategy was, for the first time, a UK government saying that we are phasing out fossil fuel heating with the ambition that no new or replacement fossil fuel boilers, i.e. specifically gas boilers, will be installed by 2035 at the latest. And we kind of phase that in, starting with off gas grid first. But key to that is, can we reduce the costs? And there's a lot of focus in the heat and building strategy about reducing the costs of heat pumps. I'm sure you will all point out the notable inflationary pressures in the economy and how things are all going to be more expensive than we thought they were. I mean, a key point here in relation to low carbon tech is really the price comparison against the fossil fuel alternative. So, inflationary pressures that apply to boilers, gas boilers or fossil fuel boilers, as well as to heat pumps, aren't necessarily a problem. But if heat pumps went up more in price than gas boilers, then that would be moving in the wrong direction. Support for the most vulnerable, and that's particularly the energy efficiency schemes, primarily energy efficiency schemes I've mentioned already. Investing in innovation, and I'll say a bit more about that as I kind of go through the slides. And then growing the supply chains and markets, and by providing the long-term signals, trying to provide the conditions for investment in how we decarbonise our buildings. So that's the kind of strategic framework. Let's click forward to the next slide. So I'm just going to run through the kind of three key technologies in terms of decarbonising heating. First up is heat pumps, which we know will be part of the solution in any scenario. So even a high hydrogen scenario, we'll probably have plenty of heat pumps on our energy system. And the government has made a commitment to 600,000 heat pumps going in per year by 2028. I mean, the consumer offer in this space is the boiler upgrade scheme, which so installations post 1st of April 2022 eligible for the BEIS, offering £5,000 or £6,000 grants depending on the technology. We opened that to applications on the 23rd of May, and I would say we made a kind of cautiously good start. The processing speeds need to increase, but Ofgem have been doing that over the last fortnight or so, and hopefully we are getting that scheme off to a good start in its early days. Also, as part of the consumer offer, important to note the VAT cut to heat pump installations, and also in relation to energy efficiency. I mean, other parts of the strategy, obviously investing in innovation. So we've got the Heat Pump Ready program that we've announced. There's the cost reductions, which we and industry have said are possible. And then on the back of those, there's a kind of package of regulations for the mid to late 2020s, which give the market sight of heat pump deployment beyond kind of initial support mechanisms. So in new build, the Future Home Standard from 2025, we consulted on the Clean Heat Market Mechanism, and I'm very pleased that that is in the Energy Security Bill as one of the measures set out in the bill today. And then we consulted on phasing out fossil fuel heating in off-gas grid areas. Another part of the puzzle is obviously Opex and rebalancing energy prices, which we know will be an essential part of how heat pumps are attractive to consumers, because we have market distortions at the moment, which mean that the running costs of heat pumps are higher than they should be compared to fossil fuel alternatives. That's still true on the gas grid, but off the gas grid, it kind of looks like it's just about gone the other way, given very high fossil fuel prices at the moment. And then the final part is investing in training and growing UK manufacturing of heat pumps. And as part of the energy security strategy, we announced a new 30 million heat pump investment accelerator to try to encourage manufacturing in the UK. Next slide, please. So second up is heat networks. So we have 338 million in the spending review for heat networks, and we have launched the Green Heat Network Fund, which is the lion's share of that money. And we're currently in round one of that with really good applications for round one. It's very good to see. And round two will close for applications, I believe, in August. And then in relation to the Energy Security Bill, there's a double triumph here. In that, I mean, we'd already announced that we were going to take forward the measures on heat network regulation and appointing Ofgem as the regulator that we'd consulted on previously. But today we announced that heat network zoning will be in the, or is in fact in the Energy Security Bill. And that's very significant play in local delivery of heating, low carbon heating solutions. And no doubt we'll talk about that more in the conversation. And then the other part of the strategy on heat networks is what to do to improve existing networks and make them more efficient. And we have done a demonstration round on the heat network efficiency scheme, and now we're getting on with launching the main scheme as quickly as we can. Next slide, please. And then a word on hydrogen as the third technology. So we are progressing with both the neighbourhood trial in Lavenmouth in Fife, and we have taken forward the proposals on village scale trials, and there's a short list of two, one in Whitby in Cheshire and one part of Redcar upon Teesside. And those are both being developed by the GDNs in partnership with local areas. And then we're taking forward the work on the town scale pilot, and we'll hopefully say more about that later on in this year. And then just the other kind of more immediate point on hydrogen is that we will be consulting, I hope shortly, on the role of hydrogen-ready boilers alongside wider boiler standards. And then finally, this, of course, the work on hydrogen and the R&D on hydrogen builds to what we've said is a decision by 2026 on the role of hydrogen heating in the mix of technologies that will help us decarbonise heating in the UK. And then final slide. So, clearly there's a very big role for consumers and help we give consumers. So, I mean, driving down the upfront costs of technologies like heat pumps, just as other low carbon technologies have been driven down, it has to be a really key part of the strategy if the transition is to be affordable for people. There's various ways of leveraging private finance, and doing things like the boiler upgrade scheme has led to new private green finance offers in the market. So some of the big suppliers are offering 0 interest rate loans against heat pump installations for the part that isn't covered by the grant. There's the questions about fair distribution of costs and support for the most vulnerable, see SHDF, see HUG, see LAD, etc. There's the upskilling and growing the workforce on all of the above technologies and on energy efficiency installations. And there's a lot of work going on by industry in this space, and government is looking to see what we can do to support that. And then, of course, there's information provision, and we have been working hard on simple energy advice to be a kind of single source of the truth. That is very much a work in progress, as I'm sure those of you looking at simple energy advice will know, but is a really key part of what government needs to do to provide simple advice to people looking to reduce their energy bills and upgrade their homes. So let me stop there as by way of giving a kind of update on where we've got to since October and publication of Heat and Building Strategy, and hand back to you, Merlin.
Right, David, thank you very much. Very insightful. Emma, if we could take down the slides, I think at that point that's probably great. Thank you, everyone, for the very busy chat and Q&A functions. Lots of fascinating thoughts and questions, and some job offers as well, which is always so David, I'm just thinking of the kind of first thought. One thing you see quite a lot in the kind of press and some of the questions from people like the Committee on Climate Change, and I was hearing Evan Davis on PM interviewing the Minister, I think it was Greg Hands, in fact, about energy efficiency, and saying, well, why don't we have the SA at that real scale of ambition in that area? It seems such a sort of obvious win-win for bills, for energy security, for carbon. We've all got stats about how much it, about 10 years ago, I think it was, the amount that we were doing per year went down. So I was just wondering what you think are the things that make that a difficult policy challenge. Is it just the scale of money that was required to fit it into it? So if it's fair to say, why isn't the scale of energy ambition quite at the scale that perhaps quite a lot of people think it should be?
Yeah. So look, that's a good question. I mean, I always start on energy efficiency by saying we have got to 46% to EPCC. So sometimes when you kind of people say about energy efficiency, you think this was completely terrible, and there's no property in the UK that is anywhere near energy efficient as it should be. But 46% up from quite low levels in the early 2000s isn't as high as we or anyone would like it to be, but I wouldn't put it in the completely terrible category. Having said that, I kind of think we have got an issue because of the Green Homes grant, and I kind of that, for all its well documented flaws in terms of the voucher part of it, has cast quite a long shadow over the kind of appetite to then do something similar to that. And when decisions were being taken on the spending review last kind of September, October, the Green Homes Grant Voucher Scheme loomed very large in people's thoughts. But I've been clear with people that there's a kind of space in our heat and building strategy which wasn't filled on the consumer offer in relation to energy efficiency, and how we kind of try and rebuild that part of the market and get it into a much better place. And there's not much more I can say about the new thing that my Secretary of State was talking about in Parliament, but that is the intention of trying to do a new thing, is to try and fill this space and provide a better offer for more people on energy efficiency beyond the schemes that I've mentioned. I mean, I didn't mention Eco, which obviously is doing a lot as well on the fuel poverty side. But the ambition is that there will be something in this space to address the gap that you identify.
Okay, thank you. I think that picks up Emily's question from Bristol City Council as well. So, just whilst we're looking at this bigger picture, that the clean heat mechanism, or the mandate on boiler manufacturers, whatever we're calling it, I'm kind of, and I guess slightly more broadly, the supply chain there, where government is requiring the supply chain to radically shift, from 100,000 plus gas boiler engineers and boiler manufacturers. I guess in a way, the car industry, which is interesting to see how that shifted. And perhaps a few years ago, there was still quite a lot of opposition from the car industry, and that largely perhaps has gone in the UK anyway. So I was just kind of interested in your engagement with the supply chain, and in this, how much you see a kind of willingness to change, or how much do you see? Yeah.
I mean, I think that the parallels with the car industry is a good one, and it's like most good ideas are borrowed from somewhere else, and the clean heat market mechanism is essentially a borrowed idea from the way that we have managed to shift the car industry from not wanting to, or not all of it, but large chunks of it not wanting to engage with what needed to happen to reduce emissions, to a place where that's where all the R&D is going. And even if an individual government like the UK government wanted to hold it back, then the kind of global trends are such that it probably wouldn't be possible to do that. And that's where we've got to move on heating systems as well, because we're not going to achieve net zero with gas boilers going in at 1.7 million a year. That has to shift. And I think what's been shown in the car space is that you need any kind of one mechanism or lever isn't going to do it, but you need something on the supply side, which is what this the clean heat market mechanism is, just as there was an obligation on the car manufacturers to improve performance. And then you also need measures on the demand side. And we've got the bus, just like we had the kind of plug-in car grant, but you also need kind of regulatory levers to create demand as well, which is the kind of package of stuff I talked about from the kind of mid-2020s onwards. I mean, there are then pressures in the supply chain. I mean, the supply chain shown remarkable flexibility on heat pumps, I would say. I mean, there's a very big rush on installations for the end of the domestic RHI, and to kind of where installers have been talking to consumers about that as that's the offer they were kind of providing an offer to the consumer against, which shows a lot of flexibility in the supply chain, which is good. And that's not to downplay the pressures there are, because there are significant pressures. But I'm also encouraged by the way that industries reacted to the signals in terms of training, and many of the boiler manufacturers have training programs. Many of the suppliers have come in with training programs. I mean, we've seen announcements by EDF and by Octopus and by Valand and so on. And actually, if you stack those up, it looks pretty good over the next few years. I think there's kind of questions about later on in the 2020s and so on, but the picture I think is kind of okay for the next few years, but it is something that we're continuing to look at and to see what more government can do in that space.
Okay, excellent. I'll just zone in a little bit more then, so to speak, into the kind of local point before we move on to Poppy. I think that pretty much we've talked a lot about the funding schemes and systems out there, and quite a lot of that money goes out through local authorities, although not all. And I think that pretty much every local authority you speak to can complain about it. It's short-term money. They spend ages writing the grant, then they get the money, they run around trying to deliver it, and then there's someone else who's writing the next grant, and it just doesn't enable them to take the kind of strategic approach which all the local area energy planning and the kind of heat network zoning is encouraging them to do. I think it sort of puzzles people. Why is it so hard to come up with a more coherent funding formula that allows elected local authorities to sort of prioritise effectively and with a bit more strategic vision? And I guess it plays a little bit to the heat network zoning consultation, and the fact that will now put in statute a requirement for local authorities to think about heating in their communities. And presumably, I don't know, the second thing you might just want to comment on is if you're doing that kind of zoning of the heat network, you're going to have to think about the counterfactual, the other options. So you are starting to really think through what is the route here towards decarbonisation in my community. But then when you turn to the sort of funding to try and do stuff about it, quite a lot of it is very patchy. You're going to have to bid for it. You don't have much coherence. So it's not so much the amount of money, like more, but the kind of strategic way it's used.
Yeah. So look, good question. I mean, there's on the macro way that local government is funded, there's a bit of kind of tail and wagging dog, and is it possible through net zero money to kind of change the way the local government finance works and so on? And there'll be lots of people on the call who will have views on that, but it kind of from my perspective, it kind of looks kind of quite hard, and added to that, I mean, there's a kind of question about scale of money that we've got for decarbonising buildings, and whether if that was kind of allocated on a formula across everyone, would we really be able to do that much collectively in any one place? And so the kind of model is more let's compete for the money and get the best results where we can move forward most quickly, recognising there'll be kind of different appetites in different parts of the country. I mean, on heat network zoning, I mean, this is a real play though in this space, because it is a thing that has pretty broad support. Like, as I say about good ideas being borrowed, I mean, we borrowed it from the Danes. It looks quite successful there. We think we can have conditions that mean it would be successful here as well. And that is really kind of empowering local authorities to be able to designate heat network zones and get buildings in the zones connected up to the local heat network. And we're doing a pilot with 28 towns and cities across the country to test out the methodology and work through how the kind of local refinements to the methodology would work and so on. And you're absolutely right. I mean, in terms of heat decarbonisation, in designating zones, then we would like local authorities to be looking at, well, what are the alternatives? We're going to decarbonise everything. So if a heat network doesn't make sense, then what do we think the solution does look like? You know, is it individual heat pumps? Is it something else? Is it kind of wait for the decision on hydrogen? But you know, that we'd like that to be part of the kind of the calculation about what is designated within the zone and what is not. And I started off by saying about borrowing about the great stuff Regen does, and I know you're keen to move on to Poppy rightly, but I mean, having looked at what's in the report, then it looks like you're kind of borrowing a kind of great idea on zoning and saying, oh well, can we apply it to a different context? And I think that's exactly the sort of debate that we should have. And so let me hand back to you, Merlin, because that's probably where you're going to go next.
Thank you, David. And you know, you're welcome to say more about the great work Regen does anytime on the call. That's fine. Keep that coming. Excellent. Okay, I think we've. I think that was very helpful to hear from David, and we spent some time beginning on the slightly broader picture before we perhaps dive down more fully into the local, which is I think where we'll spend the rest of the session. But I think it's important in thinking about that to understand what is going on nationally and how can then the national and local picture fit together. So let's come to the main event, of course, the paper launch, drum roll, and hand over to Poppy.
Hello, thanks, Merlin. So yes, I'm going to be talking a little bit through the paper. Don't worry, I'm not going to be going into too much depth because I want to leave enough time for the panel discussion. But on our first slide, you'll essentially see the government have got some really quite high ambitions for heat and buildings. As we've heard from David, they've got some really big targets, but we know there are some quite big questions also about delivery. And some of the, I guess the context for this report is that we know the solutions, or a lot of the solutions to heat are going to be local, in that they're going to be different and vary by region, by building and by household. So over the last couple of months, we've been talking to a lot of people, we've been holding workshops to really get a view on where people think local government and local leaders with their, I guess, unique reach into communities are going to be best placed to deliver part of this transformation in how we heat our homes and buildings. So we know there are an awful lot of challenges, and some of these need to be tackled nationally. But we've sort of concluded in the report that people consistently recognise that there are two broad roles for local government. The first is the strong voice and role in the development of your local heat and energy infrastructure. So this first key role really ranges from being part of the investment decision making for the electricity and gas networks in an area, to having a role in the development of this shared local heat infrastructure. So heat networks as one example of that, but we also make some recommendations about community scale shared heat infrastructure and how local authorities can support that. We're thinking about shared loops, heat batteries, and a sort of bottom-up approach to heat zoning, so a community-led approach to that. The second key role that we go into in the report is recognising the critical role that local authorities have in priming their local markets for retrofit and heat decarbonisation. So a lot of local authorities already are and are going to be in the future important actors to ensure that local areas are prepared for and can benefit from this green heat transition. And we're recommending within that they focus on the two extremes essentially of the consumer scale. First, like many of them already do, focusing on the fuel poor and the vulnerable. And then we also make a recommendation about targeting the top end of that and giving that additional support to the people we call able to pay now, and use those to build the local market. It was interesting to see David mentioning all the big national companies that are making inroads into heat pumps and decarbonisation. But we do know that the majority of people's boilers and things that are done locally are by SMEs, they're done by one-man bands. And that is where we see that local authority role is really trying to make sure that local businesses are there to benefit. So given those roles, the question we're trying to answer in the report is how can they best be delivered to keep down the cost of net zero? What we want to avoid essentially is 300 odd different local authorities replicating activity and trying to work out independently what to do. So we know that there are a lot of best practice guides, those are absolutely necessary, but we think a key part of the answer is a more coordinated and clear national support, so frameworks for how national and local government can best work together to address those challenges. And the good news, as Merlin mentioned, is that the net zero strategy recognises that necessity, but the reality is there's limited examples of this. The heat network consultation is one really welcome proposal with its sort of national methodology and local coordination approach. And it's great to see that in the energy security bill today. And so what we really need now is to transform that ability of local authorities to deliver those roles effectively and cost efficiently. So we think government's role is not just ensuring these clear roles and funding, but also in developing these sort of methodologies, providing the right sort of data, the right policy frameworks to avoid this replication of effort and cost at a local authority and regional level. So anecdotally, we know a number of local authorities are procuring their own sort of housing needs assessments, for example, to try and target what they're doing for net zero. It would be far more cost efficient, of course, if this was provided through like a national data portal. So on to the next slide. So this is our executive summary, which sets out some of the 6 specific and we hope quite practical recommendations towards building this clearer framework of local powers and planning for and delivering heat decarbonisation. I'm not going to go through them all, of course, but a critical one, which I think we've sort of already touched on with the conversation with David, was about, given the cost of living and affordability crisis, we're really recommending that local authorities carry out energy efficiency zoning and that the national government develop the methodology for them to do this based on their housing stock, as well as factors such as fuel poverty and local climate. So if you could show the next slide, please, Emma. So this is just an infographic from our report. It's a very basic illustration, we think, of the problems of the current system. So this just shows, I'm going to say greenhouse gas, but it's actually Green Homes Grant funding in the 4 local authorities in different regions across England, along with some of their statistics on fuel poverty, on their buildings, and actually importantly, local climate. It's really just a basic illustration that shows that funding is not really correlated with need. And we feel that this sort of energy efficiency methodology and zoning borrowed from the heat networks would provide a much needed basis on which to replace the existing basic, the sort of short-term competitive funding rounds for energy efficiency. So as you know, local authorities currently have to bid for funding. We mention a number of them in the report. So you've got the Green Homes Grant LAD schemes at the moment going through the net zero hubs. There's the sustainable warmth competitions for low-income households. Many receive energy company obligation funding from their energy suppliers. There's also, if you have social housing or you work with social housing providers, you can get social housing decarbonisation funding, and those taking action on their own estates are able to access the various phases of public sector decarbonisation schemes. I may have missed some, apologies, but just I guess that really emphasises that those local authorities with resource and capacity are spending a lot of time writing these competitive bids. And if they win, and I quote, they say they're running around madly trying to spend it within the short time scales they're given. Many others are not either not bidding or not winning the bids. And it's really hard to see how that current system delivers value for money, even if there's not an awful lot of funding, like David said, to spread around the place. What it does sort of deliver essentially is inequality in spending and inequality in net zero opportunity across England. So our hope is that this energy efficiency zoning would facilitate perhaps a conversation about a longer term funding structure based on need to enable them to deliver these area-based targeted energy efficiency and heat initiatives. And I guess that moves us on to one of the other recommendations, which has again been oft repeated, which is that we really need to unlock the potential for local government to use strategic procurement and local partnerships to really develop their nascent local markets for heat and retrofit, supported by a national structure and standards. So I've got a controversial example of that, I guess, in the Hinkley Point C, as someone that used to work for EDF Energy. They're absolute example of a best practice in their area. They held SME procurement events. They helped local companies upskill to provide the goods and services to their construction sites. They set targets, they set networks to support and develop new apprenticeships. So I know that's not directly comparable, but these are all things that need to happen in the decarbonising heat space. And it could happen in Hinkley because there was a long-term funding stream and they had the time and ability to plan how to spend that money well, to really support the economy and businesses in the local area. So that's just a quick run through of some of the sort of top level recommendations. I hope you'll take time to have a look at the report, because there's more in there on supply chain, on communications, and things like energy networks governance. But I guess just to conclude that, we've really found, and I know everyone on the call will know, there's really no shortage of some pioneering, I guess, and inspiring local initiatives by local authorities, really working hard on decarbonising heat. But the reality is these exist unevenly across England. And even when they are taking some great action, there is a real danger of sort of replication that is increasing the cost of net zero delivery. So we can't just rely on these leading areas to get us where we need to go. So what we're proposing here is essentially a bit more work to bring up the rear, to provide clear local government roles, powers and funding in key areas, including energy efficiency. And that will really release the potential of local government to start leading this heat transformation, and particularly making sure those local areas can benefit equally across England. So that is a very, hope, quick enough run through, but I'll hand that back to Merlin.
Thank you very much, Poppy, and yeah, kind of really helpful insight into what's in the report. So as you say, that's now out. We put a link in the chat, and you can just find it on the Regen website, of course, as well. Okay, so let's now, I think, move on to our panel discussion. So thank you to everyone who's joining us. I think what we'll do is just go straight into the discussion and invite you all to introduce yourselves as we kind of, as I ask you the first question, but you have on your screen there the list of our panelists. They've all had, it's a bit like when government launches something and before the opposition has a chance to respond, they give them like 2 hours in a sealed room somewhere with the report. It wasn't quite like that, but we sent them the report not very long ago. So thank you very much to all of you for joining. And I thought I might just start with Tom from Essex as one of those inspiring examples of people out there in the front line, kind of getting on with and delivering some of this stuff and going through some, taking a leadership role in heat and building decarbonisation from a local authority perspective. And Tom, just invite you to introduce yourself a little bit more and just perhaps give us a little bit more insight into the kind of lived experience, if I can put it that way, of a local authority officer working away on these issues at the moment in the kind of context of all the stuff David set out that's going on nationally. And perhaps you might want to suggest one thing just to kick us off that might make a big difference to that lived experience.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Merlin. And good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Tom Day. I'm head of the Energy and Low Carbon team at Essex County Council, responsible for our work across three primary areas. So renewables and innovation and how we can encourage more investment in renewable energy across the county. I lead our work on working with parishes and community energy and building a network of community energy groups across the county. And also over the last 18 to 24 months, I suppose, helped to build our work around the retrofit agenda. So retrofitting our domestic housing stock, we have 630,000 homes in Essex and about just over 75,000 homes in fuel poverty. That's figure before the most recent price cap increase. So that figure will have gone up again. And also lead our work on retrofit across the industrial and commercial sector. So really welcome this report and the debate and the discussion. I think from our perspective, I have to echo the comment made by Merlin about the challenges we've faced in responding to the really welcome government funding around Green Homes Grant and Sustainable Warmth Programme. we've been successful in both of those to attract some funding, and the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. That's led to us securing about £25 million worth of funding for Essex. That's probably going to reach about 3,500 homes, we think, roughly. So to put that into context of the 78,000 fuel poverty households that we have in Essex. So, you know, fantastic that we have access to that funding, but I have to echo the challenges around being able to get that money out the door really, really quickly. And we started from a zero base. As a county council, we don't have any of our own housing stock. And actually, it's really galvanised a fantastic bit of joint working with our 12 district parts. So that has been a kind of a success story. But notwithstanding that, getting us into a position where we've got a longer term sustainable financial solution for that sector is a continuing challenge for us. And I think one I have to echo. The other point I'd want to make at the outset as well is, yes, we are, whilst that's been a kind of very tactical response, we are also now turning our mind to what a more strategic response. So we are building our strategy and action in Essex. And I think one of the things that's really brought home to us is, you know, the time and the effort that we need to build that offer for the able to pay sector, the working capital that we're going to need to invest up front to be able to build that into a commercially viable offer for that sector, and actually the investment that we need to put into working with our communities and residents as well, which is often not factored into funding and something that is often missed. And you know, we're very much of the view that building an offer for the able to pay sector that is built upon a very strong network of local advocates is going to be critical to the success. So just a couple of quick reflections that hopefully will prompt some discussion.
Perfect, thank you, Tom. Just one very quick follow-up, so good to get on to everyone else. But the if someone said to you, why have local authorities got any problem in this? What's wrong with? Why isn't this just the market? The market will deliver. Government sets incentives and Octopus. Example, whoever. Can you just kind of encapsulate what why is it that there's a need for public sector intervention?
Well, I think hard to boil that down into a couple of things, but the things that come to mind are our role as conveners and bringing partners together. We work very closely with parishes and with local communities, and we have a very good network with local advocates, and also have a really good understanding of where the real issues are in our local communities, and how we can reach particularly low-income households. One of the things we've been able to do very successfully at Green Homes Grant is to really help with that targeting and marketing, and also with the engagement with those households, not just as the county council, but working with districts, our partners in the NHS, and also increasingly actually working closely with the utilities. So the network providers, UK Power Networks in our case, and also Cadent. All of a sudden, we've been able to help bring those partners together to make those programs more coherent. I think when it comes to the able to pay sector, there is definitely something about brand and credibility and being a trusted partner. So we've been very proud to be quite successful with our collective solar panel purchasing scheme in Essex. We've got no doubt actually that bringing the brand of Essex County Council to that, and the brand of our district partners, has really helped to build that market in Essex. And I can see some very, very distinct similarities with building a heat pump market in Essex, for example. So I think those are a couple of things that come to mind very immediately.
Excellent, thank you, Tom. I think Poppy was pointing out to me that my sound seems to be a little bit on and off, so apologies for that. I'll just try and speak more clearly and louder and closer. So Alistair, just come to you. Again, if you could introduce yourself and an insight into the current lived experience of someone who, kind of working between what's working in a local authority setting now in a community energy setting, or closely linked. And again, kind of what one thing would make the biggest difference from your point of view.
Thanks, Merlin. By way of introduction, I am the Chief Executive of Plymouth Energy Community. We're an established community energy organisation. We own and manage 25% of Plymouth's renewable energy generation resource, and we've got a programme of wider community asset building around energy and more renewables on track. And currently we've got planning approval for a 70 home net zero affordable housing scheme. So we're doing that. We are currently heavily involved in advice and providing local trusted advice and advocacy in the way that Thomas has kind of articulated the need for previously. So that's kind of my day job. Before I did that, I was working in local government for Plymouth City Council and was heavily involved in heat network zoning as now called, and planning policies and initiatives to enable that, and been involved with programs, and currently involved in partnership with the council around stuff on public sector decarb fund and the Greenhouse Grants, Sustainable Warmth Fund, local area delivery. And so I didn't think, before I moved into this room this morning, I didn't realise how much of a heat geek I actually am, but I really am. Within that, I think trust is, to answer that, what's that one thing? We need programs that build on trust, because in terms of decarbonising our homes with buildings generally, they're going to be invasive and expensive on all of us in one form or another. To move those kind of initiative forwards is going to be built on lots of individual conversations that can't be delivered from the centre. It's a key strand to your paper. But so utilising local leadership in one form or another, be that local government or other local actors like community organisations, advice organisations, will be key to building that trust in a sector that currently doesn't experience particularly high levels of trust because of the kind of flip-flops in government programmes and policies around there. There's a lot of kind of scepticism about the products being offered. And so I'd like to see government programmes enable the value of local to be realised, through local government power, but also local actors in one form or another, and to see programmes of funding, definitely, having that longer term view that Poppy's kind of articulated, but having the mechanisms to ensure that local can be brought in, because most of the way that most of the schemes are being delivered at the moment, because of the short-term nature, tend to be procured by the local authority, and a lot of the stuff outsourced out of local. And so a lot of the value and expertise is lost from that, or only they get slim picking. So programs that recognise trust and how local actors can do it, that would be kind of one key point I would throw into the mix.
Thank you, Alistair. And just one thing, how do you, as a community energy organisation working closely with the council, how do you intersect, or just very briefly, with the local supply chain? Do you work a lot with them? Do you have kind of trusted partners? How are you, promoting particular ones when you're on the call, giving advice to someone who's thinking about some of this stuff? How much interaction do you have at the moment?
A lot. So we're working to deliver we delivered last year through the LAD programs, and now through Sustainable Warmth Fund, was in partnership with the council. The council's offering a grant to the householders rather than procuring a solution for those householders. That allows the householders to choose a range of different suppliers. And our role as a community energy organisation is to provide a broker between a householder, often a householder in challenging circumstances, fuel poverty, different challenging lifestyles, interpreting what the needs that they have and the opportunities they have for their property, and then connecting those with the local supply chain, local accredited installer supply chain. So that is a section of this customer journey that isn't recognised in the current government programmes, and the need for that. So we build trust, and then we pass through to a trusted installer that we've done some work in sort of, I guess, pre-due diligence on behalf of that household. That's not a model that's regularly used in the delivery of those programmes, and it's not, a standard way that's kind of promoted, but it is completely within local government procurement regs. It kind of works, it's all been tested, and it meant that on the LAD programme, 1.4 million went into new turnover into just businesses in Plymouth and Devon, whereas the normal way would have gone to tier 1 contractors somewhere further up the chain.
Excellent, thank you, Alistair. Okay, so we started to get into the kind of supply chain and the skills issue, so I want to bring in Amy at that point, because the Social Market Foundation have been doing some thinking and work on this. Amy, do you want to introduce yourself and say what your sort of conclusions in that area are?
Yeah, thank you everyone from the panel. It's been really interesting discussion, and really congratulate you on the launch of the report. Some insightful findings and useful recommendations. So I'm Amy Norman, I'm from the Social Market Foundation. We're a think tank based in Westminster, although we conduct policy research across a range of topics and levels of government. And one of our key areas is net zero and the decarbonisation of home heat, as well as education and skills. And so recently, our kind of over the past year and a half, focus has been on this home heat green skills piece, and what the challenges are there to upskilling the workforce, developing high training standards that are trusted by the workers and consumers. And so a lot of the challenges that we find have been raised thus far, particularly in the report, issues on demand and costs and kind of advice and guidance and project management on the consumer side of things. I think just to mention one area which I think will be very relevant to local councils now moving forward is on tenure. So now that the Decent Home Standards applies to the private renter sector, well, will be come the ratification of the bill and so on. But with that policy, this now means that kind of enforcing that standard is going to be a lot more of a challenge for local authorities in terms of resourcing and capacity, particularly in areas where you have high levels of renting, to ensure that homes are of a decent energy efficient standard. So I think that's a positive step forwards for homes and for renters, and but that's just an point for how local councils could be better supported, ensuring that they have the resourcing capacity for that enforcement. But coming on to the skills piece, which has been our key area, so we find that there's kind of a lot of existing challenges with an older and predominantly sole trader workforce, and that there's the landscape for training can be, although David mentioned there's been significant kind of market developments here showing some promise. Training is still patchy kind of across the landscape of it and can really vary in its mode. And primarily there are also issues kind of with the attractiveness of the sector, which has implications on recruitment and retention and bringing in new entrants. And so I think one area for local councils, which is really important, is working with FE colleges and small businesses to identify the emerging skills needs as and when they happen, and being able to design and deliver provision that addresses that. And the local skills improvement partnerships that are being developed at the moment show as good promise, and that could be a real place for local authorities to have their say in building strategies and delivering skills, but remains to be seen what that ends up looking like on the ground. And it was a fight to get local authorities included in that. Originally it was just meant for kind of combined authorities. So in terms of the skills there, looking forwards, it could be more coordinated, which was a good sign. But I think an area which still needs further development is on this piece around new entrants. And so our research shows that information, advice and guidance for people looking to enter the sector and build the skills is really lacking. And as well as that, we know that the apprenticeship levy could use some reform. The amount of young people entering through apprentices is declining. And the way that the levy funds are reallocated is not based on a local basis. So there's some work that we've looked at around devolving apprenticeship levy so that where unspent funds do exist, they're not retained back at the Treasury, but they're actually retained in the local area so that they are beneficial then for the businesses that contributed towards those funds. There's a lot more that we could kind of go into, but I appreciate that there may be some questions. I'm happy to expand on any of those points.
Thank you very much, Amy, helpful to hear about your work. I mean, I might come back to David at this point. I think what you hear when you listen to Alistair and Amy's research and Tom's work, is the critical kind of role at a local level in getting this market going, pump priming, householder confidence, the scale of change, speed of change we need. If we just leave it to the market, there are going to be a lot of people missed out. There's going to be, likely to be quite a lot of quality issues, etc. and also the level of expertise. And I think that's something that the work that we did the last few months, you know, kind of, I noticed a real step forward in terms of local authority capability, capacity, expertise. So I wonder if there is a little bit of a kind of caricature still there in government. Do you think government quite recognises A, the kind of that critical role of local, and B, that actually, you know, local authority does have quite a lot of knowledge, skills, expertise to bring to this, or is there still a kind of caricature, as I suggested, well they, you know, they're just going to get in the way, let's leave it to the market? I think you're still on mute there, David.
It had to happen to someone, didn't it? And there you go, it happened to me. I mean, what Tom and Alistair talked about is in Essex. Sorry, I should have stayed on mute, shouldn't I?
I've got some water, but I'm afraid I can't. You know, it's from remote.
So, I mean, what's happening in Essex and Plymouth is very impressive, and I think the central government does recognise the really key role that local authorities have to play in the transition that we as a country need to make. I think you do a light on something in your report where you talk about how clear are the kind of different roles and so on. And I kind of, it would be nice to get to a place where we could be clearer about, well, where are the opportunities for kind of local government? Where is delivery best happening, say via a supplier, just like it happens under eco at the moment? Where is it that we're kind of leaving it more to consumers and the market to make choices, which is a bit the kind of, you know, on kind of heat pumps in the able to pay sector, that's kind of, you know, where we are. And so I think there is something about there's a role for all of those things in this space, and it's not, sometimes people say, oh well, it should all be done this way or it should all be done the other way. But I mean, the transformation is so huge and the building stock is so varied, is that there is space and indeed a need for all of these routes to be routes that we go down if we're going to be successful in decarbonising buildings. And yeah, in the heat space, the zoning proposals are, as we talked about, one of the ways in which we see there being a really clear role for local authorities and a really big opportunity to make heat networks a kind of central part of how we decarbonise in the vast majority of our towns and cities in particular.
Okay, now I should pick up you're on the line, so to speak, with quite a lot of the questions that have come in around the role of hydrogen often is in sessions like this. I don't propose that we go into that now, but I guess from a local authority point of view, thinking about not having a decision on that until 2026 is problematic, I would guess. I'm not sure what else you would say to comment on that, but I guess it's just kind of, you know, do you recognise the challenge that kind of timescale creates?
So to some extent, then yes. I mean, the decision on hydrogen heating has to be based on the evidence, and I mean, we've kind of tried the kind of more desk-based study kind of approach. Frankly, it hasn't led to a kind of position where you could make a sensible judgment about whether hydrogen will play a role or not. And yeah, that's the kind of foundation of the consumer trials. And it seems to me that, I mean, the neighbourhood trial is a dual pipe trial. So you're putting in hydrogen pipes alongside gas pipes, and we'll get lots of learning from that. But it seems to me very difficult to take a decision on hydrogen until you've done a gas conversion trial, which is what the village trial is. And so till you've actually converted the existing gas infrastructure, natural gas infrastructure, and turned it into hydrogen infrastructure with, you know, either hydrogen or electric appliances in people's homes, and understand the feasibility and costs and consumer acceptance of that, it is just very difficult to take a decision that is evidence-based on the role of hydrogen. I mean, what I would say in is that you know, and it's for, I mean, this is for local authorities to make judgments themselves. I mean, what I would observe the fact that, you know, when you talk to the GDNs, then you know, not many of them think it will be an 85% conversion, i.e. that the 85% is on the gas grid now will all go over to hydrogen. And there's lots of people who aren't the GDNs, more in this kind of, you know, mixed space of, oh, it'll be a variety of things. And you've seen E.ON with their 60-20-20, with 60 being the heat pumps and 20 being both heat networks and hydrogen. And so I think that areas which are just kind of, you know, a long way away from the CCUS clusters or plausible clusters, that are thinking, oh, well, it's going to definitely be hydrogen. That doesn't feel super plausible to me. And I would also observe that heat networks can obviously work with hydrogen or heat pumps or other sources of waste heat. So, you know, there's a variety of things that heat networks can tap into in all scenarios. But I think otherwise we are where we are, and that's why we've got 2026.
Well, no, I thought that was a helpful insight, and I think your conclusions would probably echo Regen's. We put out a paper on 7-8 questions for hydrogen for heating, which you know, reflect on some very big challenges in that area. And so yeah, it's your percentages there are an interesting kind of reflection on what some people are thinking. Poppy, just come back to you. I mean, we spent 6 months. You spent 6 months talking to a lot of local authorities, a lot of people compiling this. Are the kind of things you're hearing on the call from here and from the questions coming in and things, as those reflect kind of your experience and what people are feeling and saying out there in local authority world as they try and grapple with these issues?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of like we've picked up, really, there's a lot of understanding about that local role and how important that that really is in terms of this transition, because like Alistair was saying, you know, ultimately this is quite a human challenge, and you've got to change people's minds and get things done in a home, and that is an incredibly tricky thing to achieve. I guess I want to reflect a little bit on the so 2 other recommendations that we made. So I guess just building on Alistair's one, we really do think there is a significant gap there in terms of the advice that people can get, the sort of independent advice people can get on a building by building basis. Because at the moment you're sort of reading stuff online, getting generic advice, and then you're having to do an awful lot of work to really understand the sort of things that you should be procuring for your home, and whether or not you might be asking your heat pump installer to do that assessment for you, which increases the cost of sale for that heat pump installation. So one of the things we're asking is around these sort of future home assessments, and recognizing that gap, that people really do need that additional bit of independent help to move them towards investing in retrofit and heat decarbonisation. And I think the other thing, just I guess it's a bit of a reflection based on the hydrogen comment, is that obviously the GDNs have an interest in these hydrogen trials. Obviously they have an infrastructure there, but there was a question I saw about who is going to be the heat utility, and I guess that's one of the questions that we are asking, and one of the recommendations is around looking at the sort of some pilots, I guess maybe building on the hydrogen pilots, but looking at the role of the local authority in facilitating more of a heat utility provision. So we're thinking about the sort of Kensa, the Swaff and Prior examples, and the Kensa Heat the Streets, where you're using these sort of low temperature shared loop systems and taking a community approach to heat. And I think that's still a bit of a gap in terms of policy, and it's partly because there is no heat utility that is sort of banging that drum particularly, and there's no existing infrastructure there to base that on. But that you know, we think there is potentially some really important sources of projects. And like Tom was saying, those sort of bottom-up community-led schemes are really already cost in the social cost and the human cost of trying to make these changes at scale, whereas the sort of top-down approaches to putting in a heat network or a hydrogen network don't necessarily cost in the several visits you'll need to make to every householder on that street to encourage them to be part of the system. So I think that sort of social and human cost in terms of this transition isn't necessarily well reflected at the moment in some of the policies out there.
Okay, thank you, Bobby. That point actually that's really stuck with me when talking. I think it was to Kenzo about how much of their costs were cost of sales, because people weren't that used to heat pumps, and a lot of it. I think it was like a third of their cost or something. Off the top of my head, maybe up to half. And so yeah, that really struck me as an area for cost reduction. Okay, just Russell put in the chat that some references to your kind of whole house future homes assessment sort of service, and the Cozy Homes Oxfordshire scheme. I think there's one in Manchester you were involved in as well, Reg, just launched for us, if I'm right. Your Homes, I think it was. So yeah, and I think we've used some of your work, Russell, in our paper as a case study of exactly that kind of scheme. That's where the supply chain is coming together to enable, with the local authority, to enable independent whole house kind of advice, and the sort of missing bit of that in the supply chain, but clearly that's not everywhere yet. Okay, let's just move on a little bit more to that infrastructure piece that we've talked about. We started to get into there, and Tom, I want to, do you guys are starting to talk to the networks now. You're starting to get involved perhaps in heat networks. Is there do local authorities have a clear enough role in the sort of critical infrastructure, the critical heat, electricity, gas infrastructure in their areas?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's really too early to say. It's not something that's kind of as a corporate body we're familiar with in the way that we might be with the highways network, for instance, and given our statutory. I think it's a really interesting question. I think us taking on assets is a challenge, given capital constraints on our balance sheet. But I can see the potential there. But I think in reality we're going to need to understand a range of different models where you've got local authorities potentially acting as investors at one end of the spectrum, through to a role at the other end of the spectrum where we're acting more as a convener and bringing partners together. But I mean, just coming back to some of the earlier comments about understanding those opportunities for locally led projects, one of the things I'm interested to explore is how we can extract some of the value that there must be in delivering those projects on a locality basis, whether it's a local heat network or heat pumps, because the conversations we're starting to have with UK Power Networks about trying to take area-based approaches and the value that can deliver to them in terms of upgrading the network on a whole street basis or a whole village basis, or even more widely, there's some quite significant value in that for them. But how do we actually extract that to make that into part of the commercial prospects of that project? I think is a question we haven't really started to unpick in any detail yet, but there's opportunity there.
Excellent. Okay, Alistair, just the kind of infrastructure piece, the enabling stuff that Poppy's kind of highlighting, we think there's a bigger role at a local level, perhaps more in your previous role, but partly in your current role perhaps as well. Do you see that as an important area for local authorities?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I'd kind of echo Tom's and Thomas, getting too familiar, but yeah, the parallels with the Highways Authority, there are deep and regular conversations between the Highways Authority and the Planning Authority. It's a key bit of infrastructure for the city, for its current position and for its low carbon transition. That same level of dialogue does not exist around energy, be it gas or power. It's very fragmented and kind of so. So I'm encouraged to see the kind of recommendations around local authorities kind of role, local government's role in that space within these papers, and it being coming forward in the bill today and zoning. I'd caveat that and saying, like, so there's planning's one thing, delivery's the next, and the local authority can't do it by itself and it can't convene by itself. So there needs to be the mechanisms that enable other players, local authority, large public sector funded organisations, to come to the table. And my experience in terms of trying to get local heat networks off the ground, in those areas where there seemed to be the beginnings of a heat density to make a kind of beginnings of a case, marginal as it was, we're really struggling. But, actually, yeah, we wanted to do it, and yeah, other people kind of wanted to do it, but there wasn't much in it for them. There wasn't much savings, there wasn't much incentive, and it was damn complicated. So, planning is one thing, but actually I'm kind of getting back to that human thing. How do we get local people together, and how do we kind of like have the programs and policies that support those people to come together? Local government's part of that, but it can't do it by itself. It needs other players.
Excellent. Okay, Amy, come back to yourself. Anything from kind of what you're hearing in terms of your feeling about promoting the supply chain and developing the work? Is that what's coming across to you?
Yeah, I think one area that we're looking forward to and starting to research more into is kind of more on the production side and scaling up supply chains in that sense. And I think what will be really interesting to hear from the panel is not just how to do that at a national level, but also at a local level. So where we think that production is already doing quite well, and where local supply chains are developing and showing true promise. And if that differs from the national picture, I mean, we rely quite a lot on kind of the import of heat pumps, and is that a concern going forward, given kind of the energy security bill, which is out today? I don't know, David, if there's kind of a point there which you had.
Just come back quickly on that one, Dave.
So yes, I mean, that's why we announced this 30 million heat pump investment accelerator. I mean, we've been talking to all the heating system manufacturers about investment in the UK, and we have seen some notable but relatively small investments made so far. And the point of the investment accelerator is to try and bring future investments forward and at scale, because I think it will be, I mean, it's obviously important for jobs and so on in this country that they are manufactured, and supply chains that they are manufactured here, but it's politically that is also really important as well, because if we're just importing lots of heat pumps, then it's another thing that kind of pushes against the direction of travel that we need to go in when it comes to decarbonising our buildings.
Okay, well, we're coming towards the end of our session. We've had a huge amount of comments in the chat and the like, and we'll be with the slides. Maybe these days it's less the slides and it's more the chat. I think Emma indicated that we're able to capture that and circulate that with all the links, etc. Within it. I mean, I think we're every time we have these discussions about the future of heat, and the scale of the challenge and the complexity comes back to us, but also the progress we are making, some of the kind of inspiring examples we're starting to see, and what we're hearing there from Tom and Alistair about the amount of great schemes going on the ground. But I do think, and I think the kind of conclusion for ourselves coming through, and we're spending 6 months talking to people coming towards this report, is that let's go back to the point I made at the beginning, that the scale of challenge like this is a national societal challenge, and we're going to need, it's just not plausible to think that we're going to achieve that without the kind of the great cities, regions, local leaders, local authorities of the country all kind of full square behind what national government's doing, and clear frameworks of action. And I think that we're at a stage of some great examples and some great initiatives, but we're some way off the scale, the stage of a really clear framework of where local delivery is best, where national frameworks are best, and how those come together. effectively, and looking at every policy and angle through that kind of lens of what's best done at what scale and what's best done locally. And so hopefully our paper is a contribution, perhaps not the final answer by any means, but a significant and useful contribution to that discussion. And encourage you all to take a look. I think at that point, we're, 150 plus of you have stayed with us for nearly an hour and a half discussion about heat. So, Alistair, you're not the only heat geek in the room. Turns out that we're heat geek friendly this session. So, so we chose the scale of interest in the topic. But I think at this point we will give you 4 minutes back of your day. Thank you very much all for coming. Thank the panel all for participating. Really valuable. Thank you all, of course, most important for engaging so proactively and all your expertise, and indeed for so many of you for all the hard work you're doing on this, on contributing to this challenge. And thank you all for coming, and I wish you a good post-lunch cup of tea or coffee. Good to see you.